So please, if you have a Dharma question.
Who has a question?
Joe.
Yeah. I have a question about dream yoga.
Oh. Yeah.
I'm just very interested in the function of it, how it relates in Dharma practice as a whole, like how to categorize it, veggiterian practice, and what that involves.
Well, I mean, that's quite an evolved question, actually, because dream yoga practice is quite advanced, belonging to the actual techniques of that belong to the highest yoga tantra, the highest tantra class, Anatara Yoga Tantra. So it's quite advanced, not really in that sense that kind of thing that people learn right away, or could even do without lots of training. But if we talk about it in a more general way, then actually we can use our dreams in Dharma, even as relative beginners, in this sense that a dream is a way in which we can understand or start to question our notions of what is solid and what is real, even in everyday life. If we pay attention to our dreams and the strength of our experience in dreams, how real things seem in dreams, how real fears seem, how real desires and pleasures and other things seem. And then in everyday life, in a kind of gentle way, from time to time, interrogate our experiences, asking ourselves the question, well, precisely how does this differ from those experiences in dreams? One might say, well, it feels real. But of course, actually the dream time experiences also feel very real, very compelling, usually. So, without pressing this too far, even as a beginner, we can start to see that actually one's way of labelling and relating to things now is very much determined on one's mental set, one's attitude. And almost like one is imposing a solidity on the world, which isn't really there. One is projecting it out of one's habit, need for security, need for things to feel solid so one can depend upon them. And that leads to all kinds of rigidities in one's mind. You know, people become enemies, people become desirable, people become this, that and the other. And we think those qualities exist out there in those people or in those situations, but in a way our mind is lending it to them. Our mind is projecting it to them. Just as in dreams, you know, terrible monsters appear or very desirable people appear, but when we wake up we realise, well, actually it was my mind that was creating that. So using dream experience, we can start to loosen our rigidity, the rigidity of our projections in everyday life. And that creates a greater sense of openness and fluidity. Of course, it's actually the route finally to wisdom, to the real wisdom that understands, well, actually the emptiness of all things. But it's also a way to lessen our, as I say, as I was trying to hint, our strong emotional reactivity, which keeps getting us into trouble. That we react to things with too much kind of force, too much kind of labelling, this is good or this is bad or whatever. So we can, even as beginners, we can use our dreams in this way. And then the dream yoga practice, that really is as a kind of adjunct to quite advanced, quite skilled Vajrayana practice, so that comes later. Yeah.
When I first got in contact with Buddhism, it made me understand the meaning of kindness and compassion, as well as moral and ethical conduct. So inevitably, I became a vegan, as eating animals is incredibly cruel and unnecessary, whether you kill them yourself or you pay somebody to kill them for you by buying in the supermarket. And so I would like to know what your view is on it, please.
Well, I'd rather tell you what the scriptures say, the Buddhist scriptures say, because that really is a starting point for any discussion of it. And actually, they're not unanimous, in fact, the Buddhist scriptures. But it's sometimes surprising for people in the West, because one often has an assumption that Buddhism must be vegetarian or vegan. And in fact, culture, that's not usually true. So in the in the first scriptures to mention the Vinaya. The Vinaya is the Buddha's word. The scriptures which represent the Buddha's word, as we have it through his disciples, is divided into three categories: the sutras, the Abhidharma, and the Vinaya. The Vinaya is the portion of the scriptures concerned mainly with ethical training. Mostly it's from nuns and monks. There is a short kind of teaching on ethics for lay people, but mainly it's from nuns and monks. And there the question of vegetarianism is raised, because the Vinaya the Buddha's rulings on what is to be done by his monks and nuns usually is in response to a problem situation coming up. The underlying ethics are kindness and so on, but how to apply them in particular situations was elaborated in these responsive situations. So Buddha had a cousin called Devadatta, who is like the kind of perennial troublemaker in Buddha's life, and so he became a monk, one suspects out of ambition, and therefore he, as a monk, raised he said the discipline of the monks and nuns isn't strict enough. We should make it stricter. Whereas Buddha, of course, had the middle way, not too kind of austere like some Indian sects were, but also not sloppy and self-indulgent, hedonistic. So one of the rules he said should be introduced was vegetarianism. And you see, because Buddha's monks and nuns, they were beggars. They collected food that the lay people would give them. And so they would accept anything that lay people gave them. So Devadatta wanted to change that rule and say they must be exclusive vegetarian. And what Lord Buddha said is that, in fact, that they can eat meat if it's meat that is free of three situations. One is you killed it. One is you've commissioned somebody to kill it for you. Or thirdly, that you eat it when you know they've just killed it for you. Even though you didn't ask them to, you know they killed it directly for you. If meat is not eaten under those three circumstances, it is permissible. So this is the ruling from the Vinaya. And I suppose an analogy would be, if you find a dead body, you can eat it. Because see, vegetarianism in ancient India, because it did exist, was mainly based upon ideas of purity and impurity, that there's an impurity inherent in flesh. Buddhism doesn't have any ideas of natural purity or impurity in the world. The world is as it is. That's kind of like a projection of mind. So that Indian argument for vegetarianism, which is what the real Indian argument for vegetarianism is, we don't share. So that's the Vinaya. And then there are other scriptures too. So in the Mahayana, one might ask, what do the Mahayana sutras say about this? There's not unanimity. One sutra, one very important Mahayana sutra, is called the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, and that deals concerning the teaching of Buddha nature. But in there, the Buddha is represented as saying, "My disciples do not eat meat." So in China, among the serious Buddhists, because most Chinese people are kind of a mixture of religions, if any at all, but among serious Chinese Buddhists, they take that ruling from the Mahaparinirvana Sutra to mean they should be vegetarian. So very strict Chinese Buddhists are vegetarian, both the monks and nuns and the lay people even sometimes. But in another Mahayana Sutra, also equally important, the Samadhi Raja Sutra, the King of Meditations Sutra, which is very important, Buddha said, "My disciples do eat meat." So we have these different scriptural sources. And so on the basis of that and reasoning, we have to come to a decision for ourselves.
I'm struggling to understand what is emptiness of all things.
Well, we're all struggling. We're all struggling with that. But I think that the key point here is that's a big, it's a mystical term. It's a very mysterious term. almost seems counterintuitive. Or how can the world be empty? Don't I experience things? Don't I see people? Don't I feel things? So I think if we should approach it from this point of view, which is to see, well, I have this idea right now that I exist as an independent being, and that things around me exist independently. They have their own like boxes, their own integral identities. They are what they are in themselves. But actually, if we look at the world again, give it a second glance, you'll see that actually everything is interdependent. Everything is only appears to be what it is in relation to other things, in dependence upon other things. Where in the world is anything that actually exists in itself, in its own private space, in its own box, in its own separate reality, with its own separate identity? I cannot find it. I look at the world of nature and I see it always just interaction, process and interaction. I imagine that the world out there is separate things, but that's just in my imagination where I'm projecting or reading it. Actually, it's all process and interdependence. And me too, who am I? How would I know myself without relation to others? So my identity is constructed in terms of my relationship with others, my dependence on others. Not to mention it's also constructed out of the interaction of mind and body. And they are not one separate entity either. They are a multitude of interacting energies and forces. So the more I look into the world, the more I don't see separate, independent box things like self, like other, like this, that and the other. I see just process and interdependence. That way I'm approaching emptiness, because what emptiness means is the world is empty of independent, inherently existent entities. We're misreading it. We're freezing the world, and then we're freezing the world, like take a snap of it, and then we're chopping it up into imaginary bits. When in fact the world is never frozen, it's always changing, always moving, always interacting, and nothing stands alone outside of this dance of interdependence. If I start to look at the world that way, as I say, I'm approaching emptiness, because emptiness, rather than meaning nothingness, or just, yes, black hole, nothing at all, it means the world is empty of that kind of entity, self-existent, enclosed in its own space, but it's full of interdependence. That way I'm approaching emptiness, because finally we say the term interdependence and the term emptiness are two terms for one reality. It's just approaching the different ways. So I think for beginners, well, yes, most of us, the right way to look towards emptiness is just to look for interdependence.
When someone says Nigel Farage or Donald Trump, it seems to create a lot of anger in some people. And when I see this anger arise, I feel a sadness, because I see that I could be Nigel Farage or Donald Trump, or it's almost, as you say, a result of the situation in which they're born in, perhaps. Is the sadness useful?
Yes, it is. Because they're not your enemy. They're also suffering sentient beings, as is Jeremy Corbyn, David Cameron, Hillary Clinton, Uncle Tom Cobley and all. They're all suffering deluded sentient beings just like me. So a sadness is a beginning towards compassion. So it's a good feeling. It regrets kind of rigidity and hatred, and is a start to feeling, well, exactly that. They're suffering sentient beings. So I like that. I think that's a good approach to take to politicians. Sadness. Because it's a beginning of kindness, I would say. Yes. Sure.
Is there a way to encourage a teenager into Buddhism? It's somebody who's not had any contact with it.
Yes, well, I was a teenager and I came into to Buddhism in I first heard about it in 1966. I was certainly a teenager. But then, you know, there were different cultural icons in those days who might lead you to a teenager interested in being cool and rebellious. They might lead them to Dharma. Maybe such don't exist right now. So I can't think of any people teenagers might be interested in that would lead them to Dharma. Maybe is Taylor Swift a Buddhist? I don't know. Maybe not yet. I think the thing is that the warmth of your warmth and kindness and friendliness will inspire them. I think that's the best way. From one side, from the emotional side, for making them have an emotional rapport and easiness with Dharma. I think they've got to see a few things really. One is that Dharma makes kind and good and friendly people, but then so does Christianity sometimes. So does this, that and the other. That's not enough, therefore. Also, when they've got to know there's something intellectually powerful about the Dharma. There's something intelligent and not afraid of asking questions. And so that's an important, because sometimes, it depends on the teenager of course, but sometimes they are very intellectual, or very questioning at least. And so the fact that Dharma can talk about things in a very free and inquiring way, it's a way of inquiry. It's not, oh, this is the creed and you better believe it. It's more like the teenager's natural curiosity about, well, what is the world? What is real? These are good ways in which a teenager can, the more intellectual type at least, can connect with the Dharma. The questions they might be asking also in science, for instance, like or philosophy, like what is reality? What is really out there? What is my mind? What is the world? These are questions Buddhism is all about. So I think we've not done enough, but we should signify that this is, this is Dharma's area, and that, so the teenagers asking questions about the meaning of life, the nature of the world, they can use Dharma as a way to look at the world. So that's a second thing I think. And then I think also that when they've got their own personal problems, their own kind of emotional turbulences and emotional storms, that when they open to it, to get them to encourage them to sit in a very simple way, just being attentive to their emotions and so on. That's very good. It will give them a great strength in comparison with other people. Actually, give them a great strength, because nowadays teenagers are kind of so dominated by the media and there's no space in the world, so they become estranged from themselves. I think very strongly nowadays, because they live through these electronic media. So giving children the chance to find out more about themselves, to make friends with themselves more, which sitting allows us to do, that's the third route. So like the experiential thing. So I think the emotional warmth of us as their friend, as their parent, the fact that they can use Buddhist questions to question the nature of the world, and the fact they can try sitting and see what a difference that makes to them. I think these are three areas. And another thing is, which is difficult, not difficult, but well, I suppose it goes back to what I was saying in the second thing, that one of the difficulties is this, that even though religions are taught in school, not just Christianity, but other religions are taught in school, I often feel, I suspect, that this is not helping Buddhism at all. Because this whole Western division between science and religion, philosophy, science on one side and religion on the other, is a Western thing. It's not, that division never happened in the East. And so religion, what I think happens to Buddhism is the children, the overall message in our society, the ideological message is science rules, often propounded by people who know nothing about science at all, but they're just ideologues of one kind or another. But science has been invested with a over-prestige, often by not scientists. So you've got science on the one side, that's sensible, that's what all grown-up people believe, and then religion. Okay, Buddhism is a nice religion, they think, as opposed to horrible, nasty Christianity, which is a ghastly travesty of Christianity, because it's also done much good in the world. So what they come out of school with thinking is, yeah, Buddhism's the nicey religion. It's a bit wishy-washy, really. It's just about people flashing peace signs and stuff like that. So if I had to be a religious person, I'd be a Buddhist. But it's nothing really serious. It doesn't speak to the deep problems of life. So that's what I'm saying when I come back to the question thing. In Buddhism, we have everything to challenge that kind of dominance of materialism and that kind of narrow philosophy of the world. And teenagers, intelligent ones, should be getting into that. Should be seeing that Buddhism is a way to ask the questions, the powerful questions about that. And that's why I think the way Buddhism is taught in schools is probably not helping, because it's just like, as I say, they come away with the feeling, well, if I was going to be religious, but that's really just for nutters and back people, I would be Buddhist because it's at least it's inoffensive. That's terrible. So I think we have to, when teenagers have intellectual questions, that's another area to work with them on. So our emotional example, the intellectual fearlessness of Buddhism, the vast inquiries it opens up, and then the experiential side from a bit of sitting. Something like that. And then also we should remember we were teenagers. I practice a lot of low jump with the teenagers, taking on their teenage moodiness. They're sending our detached adult compassion back to them.
Lama,
Yes.
is it possible to communicate with worldly deities?
Worldly deities.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question, a very good question. But to give it you have to be very quiet and very still. And in our society, we're not. Worldly deities are like the spirit in nature. They're like the energies, the feelings that are there in the natural world, in mountains, in lakes, and so on and so forth. And in the West, we were told that we ignored such things for many centuries because of the religion that we got, so Christianity, because it said, don't look for such things, don't ignore them or turn away from them. So we've lost the habit of attending to those things, which were in the West. But if we go to such places, countryside places, if we're very quiet and we listen, we can feel something. And maybe that's the worldly deity speaking to us. But we've got to be very quiet and very simple and very open to things, to feel it. Whereas in Tibet, even now the worldly deities speak to people in that way, that people feel these presences in nature, even after the communist takeover and everything. Still it seems like the worldly deities are present. Of course they won't help us with enlightenment, there's nothing to do with that. But it's good to feel that there's these presences in nature. It kind of helps us, I think, to feel wider as people. So yes, go to quiet places. Go to places like, I won't say Stonehenge because there's too many people there already, but there's some old places in England where there are stone circles and places like that that not so many people know about. Maybe you can hear them there. Sure.
I have a question around rebirth.
Yeah.
So I have in mind, for example, refugees.
Yeah.
And why so many people would be reborn in that situation, and what the role of political and geographical circumstances are in that scenario. So why so many people would be in that same situation?
I think the thing with karma is this, that actually if we think very deeply about karma, we see that every action we make now is changing the world, is changing us. So, in other words, and when you factor in the fact that from a Buddhist point of view, this present life we have is just one in a stream of lives, it quickly makes the picture extremely complicated in terms of saying, oh, they must have done that specific action in a past life, that's why they're now experiencing it now. It's too simplistic. What we can say from nature, just looking at nature, is that everything arises from causes and conditions, which ripen in certain ways. Certain seeds give rise to certain flowers. Similarly, certain actions from us change us as people in a good way or a bad way, and change the world around us a little bit, change other people. So we're part of a web of interdependence, of interconnection, of cause and effect. So, therefore, for us who are within that, it's extremely difficult to say with any certainty at all, oh, this particular result you're having now, like for instance being a refugee, is because you did X in a previous life. Yes, in some ways, everything we've done culminates in where we are now. That's true. Everything I've chosen to do, everything I've done with the world has led to this present situation. But I can't just abstract one thing and say, that's why I'm suffering this thing now. It's just, Buddha said that you shouldn't try to speculate in that way. So I think what we should feel about refugees is each one of them has a different karma. Each one's a different person. Yes, there's some way that there's something in their lives which at this time is ripening in this present situation, but other things may ripen later on. The refugee may become a prime minister in another life, or may become a prime minister later in this life. The disabled person might be a brilliant scientist. So you see what I'm trying to say, that we cannot say, oh, all those people have done this bad thing or this good thing, and therefore that's why they're having this result. When we look at ourselves, however, when something difficult is happening in our life, we should surely think, instead of thinking, oh, it's his fault or her fault, we should think, yes, this must be the culmination of things that I've created, and I'll accept that. So for ourselves, we understand that everything is a ripening of our particular actions we've done in the past. When we look at other people, we think more, they're compassion. We need to have compassion for those people, instead of saying that, oh, that's the ripening of your past karma. That doesn't help. What helps is to share and help and intervene and help them in whatever way sensibly that we, and with wisdom that we can. So, true, every situation is the ripening. Most situations are the ripening of karma. There's also things that just happen through accident, like earthquakes and things like that. And therefore the karma of the people, that is, will show in how they respond, because different people respond to different occurrences differently. And that's according to karma. Some person will react with fortitude, some with weakness, some with courage, some with not, some with selfishness. And that's how their karma is ripening in that situation. So again, among the refugees, some will be kind, some will be exploitative, just like in any crowd of people. And that will be more their karma ripening, how they handle that situation, how they respond to it, rather than the situation itself, if you see what I mean. So, to go back to the point, when it comes to our situation, we should really draw on the teaching of karma, so that we don't blame other people for our situation. And we remind ourselves that through our actions now we have the power to change the future for ourselves and others. But when it comes to others' difficulties, the teaching we should rely on is compassion. And one very good way to do that is to think, well, actually, in innumerable lifetimes I've been in every situation. I too have been that refugee. And so therefore, how can I think this is something nothing to do with me? I've been in that situation. I might well be in that situation again in the future. And therefore, in that way, we really create this sense of compassion and responsibility to help those people.
On rebirth, so I struggle with understanding what exactly it is that is reborn, given that there's no self.
Yeah, that's true. But there's mind. There's mind. But we unfortunately we shrink mind, we freeze it, and identify what is a process, a continuing changing process, with a snapshot in time, which we then say, that's me, that's my mind, unchanging, permanent, autonomous, and all the rest of it. Whereas, and that then to think, well, how could this me who's unchanging, me, identified with this thing now, how could that go into somewhere else? That seems implausible. But whereas if we start to melt that sense of rigidity, of being a frozen static being, and see what we are as just a moment in the process, another wave arising within this stream of mind, then the sense of continuity is very easy to understand. Because after all, nature teaches us continuity. It teaches us how impermanence and continuity are two sides of reality. So I won't be the same person in the next life. In that sense, I won't be reborn. The process of mind, because it doesn't originate from physical things, will continue. But of course, that won't be me. That is just the process. Just like the River Thames, as it flows through London, is not the same as the River Thames in Oxfordshire. That's where it rises, I can't remember now. But it's not entirely separate. It's part of a stream, part of a continuum. And so this analogy of a river or a stream is the best way to understand the process of mind. And we can even see that within this lifetime, how tomorrow I will not be exactly the same as now. The thought, this is me, may arise in that mind stream, but surely there have been change and difference between now and tomorrow, even within this stream. And so, as I say, there are two ways to approach rebirth. One is the logical teaching on how mind cannot arise from mere non-sentience. But the other way is experiential way, which is just looking at the mental process, at constant change within this stream. Because once you've dissolved the kind of rigid box of self, then you're open to the sense of continuity. But at the same time, you're not longing to perpetuate this self. You see, like, we reject eternalist views in Buddhism. Eternalist views like, I will live forever, I will go to heaven, I will always be me. We reject that because that's of course completely contradictory to impermanence. So it's not that I will be reincarnated in such and such an entity, it won't be me. But on the other hand, we reject annihilationism because everything is process. Nothing disappears, nothing comes to a full stop. So rebirth is therefore a way to describe that sense of process.
I have a question about the process of enlightenment. One way I understand it is there's a distorted vision of mind, which isn't its true nature, and enlightenment is like the ceasing of that distortion, the gradual erasure of that distortion. I'm thinking if it can go from being distorted to clear, what's stopping the view from becoming distorted again?
Right. Well, you see, there's a ghost in your assumption. The ghost is the Christian idea of the fall, and which is that there was a state where everything was perfect, and then somehow evil entered into the world at a first point. But we don't believe in first points. We believe in process. So everything arises from. So let's follow this through. Why am I deluded now? Why am I not enlightened? And the reason is because in the previous moment also, I did not awaken to the nature of reality. And instead what is propelled forward is this ignorance, this ignorance which ignores reality. I'm ignorant now because I was ignorant in the previous moment. And it goes back. And so therefore Buddha said, you cannot see any first point to samsara. So therefore when I say, well, how can it end? Well, it ends as soon as you see clearly. And when you see clearly, there's no longer any further propulsion for ignorance. Like, you may have been imagining for many years there's a monster under your bed. But when you finally pluck up the courage and look, and there's no monster there, that delusion never returns. Because you realized its fundamental non-existence. And similarly, this ignorance, and all the consequent suffering that comes from it, is delusory. So when you see that you've been misunderstanding the world, when you see radically and totally you've been misunderstanding the world, there is no fuel for further suffering, for further misunderstanding. So that's how, although samsara is beginningless, it's not real, and therefore it will have an end. So you cannot. Now, in our where we're at, and where people consider to be more advanced than we're at, it's not like this. There's an alternation between ignorance and glimpses. We can fall back from the few glimpses we've had. We can fall back because our habits of narrowness and tightness and delusion can reassert themselves and completely divert us from the path. So we can definitely fall back. But when one has really seen totally that the ignorance has no foundation, there's nothing further propelling it forward. It comes to an end completely. That is the meaning of nirvana, the blowing out of the fuel, ignorance, hatred and desire, which causes suffering. When the fuel's exhausted, there can't be any more fires. So when the fuel's gone, there's no more samsara. That we can understand logically in this way. But as I was saying, for us, mere beginners or even people who have started on the path, yes, we can fall back. We can lose the little glimpses that we've had. Which is why it's so important, as I was kind of teasing almost yesterday, but it's so important in the West that we get a measure of how radical enlightenment really is compared to the small things that we've experienced, the small glimpses and understanding we've experienced. Unless we imagine that the tiny glimpses we've had of reality add up to us being enlightened, and then we become terribly disappointed when we realise our disturbing emotions are still very strong. And then we say, well, therefore there's no such thing as enlightenment. That's just because we overrated ourselves to begin with. It takes quite a lot to stop being a fool, and none of us have got there yet.